What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for game week 35. So we're going to look through some of the popular players in and out. Are people making a mistake with their transfers this week? And we're going to start off with Harry Kane. 12.5 million, nearly 45,000 transfers out already. A lot of owners getting a little bit frustrated. I think Spurs have had no shots on target last two games. It's not been what we've kind of gotten accustomed to from the previous games where they were just scoring goals for fun. So the question is, should we be getting rid of him? Now, he is a lot of money. I feel like broken record alert. I've said all along, like, Harry Kane's great. If you've got the team value, you can get the rest of the squad you want. But Son is a little bit cheaper, gets you money to spend elsewhere. And I think at this point, people are trying to maybe beef up their defence, maybe getting Coutinho, Foden, Mount, Havertz, etc. Those kind of midfield prices into their midfield slots as well. And Harry Kane is kind of being the scapegoat for that, which is fair enough. He's a lot of money. And obviously, captaincy is a big factor as well. Now, a lot of this is going to come down to chip choice and things like that, but I would argue in game week 36 he's probably not going to be the best captain. That probably will be Mo Salah. If Man City's double gets put into game week 36, you could argue for someone like Kevin De Bruyne, maybe possibly even Cancelo, Trent, players like that. But I think Kane playing against Liverpool away, Arsenal at home, is not necessarily ideal. He's not an awful captain by any stretch, but he's probably not the best. Game week 37, there's a double game week. You could make an argument that Kane is the best captain in game week 37, but again, Salah will play Southampton. He's an alternative. Plus, you got double game week players. Maybe Watkins, Coutinho, Richarlison. I know they don't sound that exciting, and I know everyone's going to sit here and tell me they're going to captain a single game weeker, but when it comes down to it, most people will captain double game week players. So then it's really just that Norwich game. Now, you could make an argument as well that Leicester at home is pretty decent for captaincy. They almost certainly will rotate in this game because it's right smack between their two European semi-final, kind of obviously first and then second leg. So I do think he's a pretty good captain this week as well. So I think for game week 35, because of the way the fixtures are falling and how I kind of picture most people's squads, obviously that's a broad overview, I don't know if there's a big reason to sell Harry Kane this week. It's not like there's loads of other really great strikers to go for necessarily, unless you've maybe got 2 free transfers and you want to spend the money or you think a hit is worth it. It's probably worth waiting until maybe game week 36 to do it. The other thing I thought I would take a quick look at, right? So this is from FB Ref. So this is Harry Kane. And I know this is difficult to kind of see because there's so many different numbers on here. But these ones here with the mouse is, this is his expected goals and his expected assists, right? So these are the 4 games before, you know, the lack of goals and assists happened. So this is Everton, Man United, Brighton and West Ham. Obviously, Everton was that game where they were so open and Lampard just didn't change anything. They tried to press. Spurs just kept playing through it. Kane did ridiculously well. Did really well against Man United as well. Obviously got the penalty in that game too. Interestingly enough, against Man United, it was 0.8 XG. Didn't really do anything outside of the penalty, according to these numbers. And then he's done well since. In the last few games, so we're looking at Newcastle, Villa, Brighton, Brentford, the numbers are down, but I wouldn't really let that worry me, right? The small sample sizes of this aren't really helpful. Has much really changed last 4 games versus the first 4? We know what he can do is what I'm trying to say. So I think unless you really need that money for an upgrade this week, and maybe you need like Robertson or someone like that in your team, which is perfectly fair enough because I think he is probably as good, if not a maybe slightly better option over the next few weeks, then I think you can probably keep him. I don't think there should be this rush to get rid of him. It wasn't too long ago that Harry Kane was seen as essential in some ways and like maybe even an alternative every week to Salah captain, and all of a sudden he's kind of blanked in a few games and now people are a little bit worried. This is Harry Kane. At some point he's going to start getting penalties back as well. He will bang in the goals and you could keep him for 36. The one thing I keep talking about game week 36, especially for those midfielders, is the amount of rotation because the teams in Europe, because the teams in the FA Cup. Spurs don't have that. He's not going to get rotated. So if you've got a decent looking squad, you can keep him for game week 36. There's much worse players than having Kane or Son pretty much guaranteed to play every single minute. And don't forget that game week 38 fixture. That could be a decent differential captain on the last day of the season against Norwich. Oh, I hate that we're talking about possibly selling Rhys James, but that's the situation we're in with FPL right now. only kind of nearly 16,500 transfers out, but I know there's a lot of people in the community that own him and are wondering what to do. Most obviously sensible FPL managers are waiting to see what happens in the Man United game, and ideally I'd record this video afterwards, but I think we can still kind of talk around the issue no matter what happens in that Man United game. So the problem we have with him right now is he's obviously not been long back from injury. The first two games that a lot of us bought him for, game week 31, 32, he didn't start. Then he does play in game week 33, and then in game week 34, the first game of the double against West Ham, he's not in the squad at all. Now that did worry me a lot because before he's just had his minutes managed and he's on the bench and then he comes on. But to not be in the squad at all just tells me there's either something there or they really are just worried about managing his minutes. And just as a reminder, the FA Cup final against Liverpool is between Leeds away in game week 36 and Leicester at home in game week 37. So for a lot of Chelsea players, there could be rotation in that Leeds game. They're not going to rotate the whole 11. But for someone like Rhys James, where they're clearly talking about managing the workload, managing his minutes, etc., he's surely going to be one of the players that doesn't play in that Leeds game. You would imagine, right? The Everton game is not long after the Man United game. So I'm just going to double check exactly when it is. So Man United game is on Thursday. The Everton game is on Sunday. So even if he plays against Man United, is he really then going to play 3 days later against Everton as well? I'm not saying it's guaranteed that he won't, but it looks pretty likely. And then you might only get one game in the double as well. So suddenly you're potentially looking, next 4 fixtures, if you include the Man United one, he may only play twice, Man United and Wolves, and then you're skipping game week 35 and only getting a single game week in the double. So right now, depending on what happens against Man United, I'm thinking about selling him because even when he plays, he's playing right centre-back a lot. And we know that he's obviously a better FPL option when he's playing right wing back. He's probably a bigger asset to Chelsea when he's playing right wing back as well, because no one really does it better at the club than him. But Tuchel has specifically mentioned the reason he's playing right centre back is because they can get more minutes out of him. It's less of a physically demanding role than playing right wing back. So the Rhys James we know and love as an FPL option, marauding up and down that right wing, getting goals, getting assists. Like you can see by the numbers, it's ridiculous. 0.34 goals per 90 minutes, 0.4 assists. These are crazy numbers, right? Whether or not he could keep them up over a longer time span like Trent, who knows? But we know he's right up there as one of the best wing backs in the league. It's not the same Rhys James that we have right now. And even if he doesn't play against Man United, are we then going to be sure he plays against Everton? And then what in the double? I just don't see how he plays both games in game week 36. And then for those of you that are free hitting 37, it doesn't matter. And yes, Watford at home, if he starts that game, I'll be very worried about not owning him if he's playing right wing back. But I don't think for 6.4 million, you can make that sacrifice and just wait all the way to game week 38 and then hope he starts that game. There's plenty of points in the meantime to be getting. You've got some defenders we're going to talk about like Matty Cash in a minute. Robertson obviously is a really good upgrade. Laporte if you wanted to come down a bit. Cancelo if you don't own him for whatever reason. And obviously we need to keep an eye on Alonso. He may get more minutes than James over the next few weeks and he is attacking as well. So I'm going to wait and see for my final decision after the Man United game, but I think there's a lot of reasons why you could justify selling at the moment. I don't like the sound of it. And if he was going to play all these games, there's absolutely no way I'd be considering it. But I just think that's super unlikely. I think if he plays, there's every chance he's playing right centre-back. He's not as good as an FPL asset then. And even that is a stretch that he's actually going to play. I think out of all the Chelsea players, because he's off the back of an injury and stuff like that, they really need to manage him. That FA Cup final now is the last thing they've got to play for. They need him against Liverpool. They need him at right wing-back, maybe even right centre-back. They have to manage his minutes. I think we can probably sell him, and I hate saying that. So Matty Cash, very popular this week, nearly 50,000 transfers in, and for very good reason. We're probably going to talk about Aston Villa players a lot this week, because they've got that really favourable home fixture. Norwich at home doesn't really get too much better than that, especially for a defender. And then they've got back-to-back doubles, of which they have to play Burnley twice, Crystal Palace, which is not necessarily easy, but it's a home game, it's decent enough. You'd imagine clean sheet potential is okay in that. And obviously they've got to play Liverpool, but I think when 4 of your next 5 fixtures are really good and they're over the span of 3 game weeks, right? You've got to look at those kind of players. Now, again, chip strategy is going to come into play quite a lot here. If you've got no chips, Aston Villa players have to be very high up the list of players to bring in. Exactly the same thing I said about Coutinho yesterday. You need to just keep an eye on that game week 38 fixture. Now, again, this season compared to not necessarily last season, but previous seasons before that, quite often you didn't necessarily have a squad full of playing players, It's a little bit different this year. So if you can get to game week 38 and bench cash, because I don't think there's really going to be many points in that against Man City, right? You'd expect City to score, then that's fine. But you need to be careful that you don't get too many of these players that you're not happy about playing in game week 38. Then suddenly you're stuck with them with difficult fixtures. So just keep that in mind. If you are someone that's kind of free hitting in game week 37, which I am, then cash is a little bit less essential is probably the wrong word, but he's not quite as good an option, because you can get him in game week 37 anyway, and then you look at the 36 double and you think, well, Villa will probably concede against Liverpool, even though that game is before the FA Cup final. So if Liverpool are going to rotate, possibly that's the week they do it. But I just think, again, broken record alert, with the way the league is right now, they're not going to rotate enough players where suddenly it's an easy game for Villa, right? It's still going to be tough. So if you're free hitting in 37, not quite as good, but still decent. I think it really just depends on what other players you're not going for. So we all know that Trent, Robertson, Cancelo are probably the three best defenders right now in FPL. Originally, that would have included Rhys James as well, but for all the reasons I just spoke about, I'm not convinced now. Maybe Alonso, but again, he could suffer from a bit of rotation as a Chelsea player. And then you've got Laporte as well. Now, he looks really good for game week 36 in particular, if that's the double, and I'd argue better than Cash. But outside of those players and those teams, there's probably not too many better defenders. So if you are looking at Cash, and it might be, no pun intended, a reason to save Cash as well, right? He's only 5.2 million. He's cheaper than all those defenders I've just spoken about. I think he's a really good option. Norwich at home looks like a decent clean sheet. Even if they don't get a clean sheet against Liverpool, there's a good chance of getting one against Burnley, and then there's a very good chance of getting 1 or 2 in game week 37. It's obviously not going to work out like that. They're not going to get 4 clean sheets in the next 5, but there's a good enough chance of them getting some decent points, and he's fairly attacking as well. He probably is the best defender to get from Villa. It's just game week 38 that I would think about. And obviously, if you're free hitting in game week 36, even better, because you get him for Norwich, Palace and Burnley. You probably take him out for 36. So overall, I really like him. All those big defenders from the big teams in general are probably better options. But if you need someone a bit cheaper, Cash is your man. All right, Gabriel Jesus, ridiculous score against Watford last week. And now he's very popular, 64,000 transfers in. As I always say, right, anytime a player gets a hat-trick or more than 3 returns in a game week, they're always going to be popular transfers in. And he's only 8.5 million. And if he was guaranteed to start all these games, he probably would be a really good option, especially when there's not too many strikers that people are looking at right now. We're going to talk about one more in just a second. But Leeds away is good. They've got that Wolves away game to slot in. We think it will probably go in game week 36, but again, the longer they leave this announcement, the less chance that happens. It could go into 37, but either way, at some point they've got another double game week. But let's not beat around the bush. There is no way to know if he is nailed on for all of these games. Now, in the past, we have seen with Man City, I can't remember if it was last season or the season before, the Champions League, there was very much a rotation kind of strategy with Pep. And, you knew that these players were going to play in the Champions League, and there was a good chance that these different players were going to play in the league. The difference was the league wasn't so tight with just 1 point in it. So I don't think there's any way that you can guarantee that Gabriel Jesus even starts the next game against Leeds. Even if he doesn't play in the Champions League, for example, Foden will definitely start the Champions League. Bernardo Silva will come back in. These players could also then play against Leeds as well. I think Pep will definitely pick and choose where he rests players, and I'm not sure Leeds away is going to be the time where he really does it that much. So Gabriel Jesus could play, but there's also a good chance he doesn't. I think, in my opinion, you just accept the fact that you've missed a really massive haul, and he's probably not going to get one again. The good thing is, his numbers are brilliant, right? His expected goals, expected assists are really decent. But he is a player, I think, over the last kind of 4 or 5 seasons where we've got his numbers on kind of FBref, he does often underperform against his expected goals. So he is someone who, we see Son as like a top finisher. The numbers seem to suggest that Jesus is kind of quite a bit below that. Not awful by any stretch, but if he's on 10xG, he may only score 7 or 8 goals, something like that. That could change around over the next few years. We'll have to wait and see. But right now, I just think he's just not someone I would use a transfer on. I think if you want to get Man City players in and they do end up doubling in 36, there's more kind of more consistent starters like Foden, like De Bruyne, like Cancelo, like Laporte. That is where I would probably spend my transfers. Obviously, with Man City, just really quickly to finish off this little section on Jesus, if you nail the right player, like we've just seen against Watford, there's massive, massive returns. But the thing is, the next one could be Mahrez, it could be Sterling, it could be Bernardo Silva, it could be Gundogan. It's hard to know. So I just don't think I'd be starting to use transfers on Gabriel Jesus just because he got a massive return. Chances are it's not going to happen again anytime soon. So I won't spend a huge amount of time on the fixtures just because it's exactly the same as Matt Cash, obviously. But we know Villa are very good. 2 back-to-back doubles, Norwich at home. The same point stands with Game Week 38. I would ideally want to bench Watkins or be able to transfer him out. And obviously it's all well and good being able to do that for one player. But if you've got a lot of Villa players, you really need to think about how you're going to work that. I guess it's not the end of the world to have to play one of them against Man City, but realistically, you're not expecting any points. So that's that out of the way. In terms of a forward, I think Watkins is a decent enough option just because there are limited options. And I think if you are someone that needs a player this week plus someone with a double game week in 36, there's way worse players you could pick than Ollie Watkins. So I do quite like him. I think the alternatives really are Pukki, who obviously saves you a bit of money. I think he's 6 million now, so he's 1.4 million cheaper. And again, maybe that's your money to go from Rhys James to Robertson, in which case you probably just go for Pukki. I don't think Watkins is so superior to Pukki that you need to make sure you've got the money for him. But obviously that Norwich at home fixture does kind of swing it quite a lot. I think Norwich's fixture, well, obviously, yeah, it's away to Aston Villa, is not quite as good as Watkins. And if you remember from earlier on in the season, I picked Pukki when everyone went Watkins. Again, just to reiterate, that's because I wanted to save money, not because I thought Pukki was better. Watkins got a goal and assist and Pukki got absolutely nothing. That might be different now. I think it's new. I don't think Dean Smith was in at that point. But yeah, Watkins is better for this week. And then the double was okay. I know Liverpool at home's not an amazing fixture, but I think getting the Norwich at home game this week kind of counterbalances that. The only other striker really, and if we're not talking Jesus, is Richarlison, because I know Everton have been poor, and I'm not expecting huge things from them. I just think Leicester away, and Leicester obviously got Europe and stuff to compete with as well, and then Watford away is a good fixture. As a differential, Richarlison on penalties could be a nice option for a very similar price to Watkins. The problem is, if you need to bring them in this week, Richarlison has to play Everton, and that is not necessarily ideal. So I think if I was having to bring the player in this week, I think Watkins is probably the one to go for. If you can spend the money wisely and in a good way, I would definitely get Pukki instead. And if you're someone that can wait until 36, then maybe you go for Richarlison, who also has back-to-back doubles. But again, if we're looking no free hit territory, then 35 to 37, Watkins is definitely better than both Pukki and Richarlison. And I think he's a fairly good, decent transfer in. Nearly 40,000 of you have done it already. Let me know below, what are your transfer thoughts for this week? Rhys James owners, are we really going to sell him? It feels like one of those players you just never want to sell, but we might just have to rip the band-aid off and get it done. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed that video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.